联合国气候变化纲要公约第30次缔约方会议 COP30 于11月10日上午在巴西北部城市贝伦正式揭幕。这场没有美国总统川普，也没有中国国家主席习近平出席的联合国政治演讲秀，本来被外界预期会少了一些戏剧性。即使今年是巴黎协定签署10周年，预料相关回顾与检讨的议题分量不轻，但少了2大国领袖站台，许多观察人士表示不看好会有突破性的政治火花。然而，随着会议展开，一连串超乎预期的新闻与现象接连浮现，反而让 COP30 成为近年来最具争议性也最值得深思的一届。如果说过去的 COP 是全球权力的正面交锋，那么今年的贝伦则更像是一面照向世界的镜子，照见各国在气候议题上累积的期待与疲惫，理想与无力，承诺与现实，也照见在重量级领袖缺席之后，国际社会如何自行填补空白，重新抢夺话语主导权，并在这个舞台上不经意地展现出某些近乎荒谬的矛盾。
Well, the Amazon sets the stage for the most crucial climate talks of the year. COP30 host Brazil aims to bridge rich and poor nations, yet questions remain over leadership, finance, and whether the world can still deliver on its promises to limit climate change.
Everything is set up to welcome around 50,000 participants for the most important global climate summit of the year, the COP30. Leaders will join negotiators, experts and activists over the next 2 weeks in Belém, the so-called gateway to the Amazon rainforest. One key topic of the summit, how to adapt to a warmer world and who is going to pay for it.
It began with the sound of drums, a beat that echoed through the humid air of Belém, deep, urgent, unrelenting. Then came a chance, resistance. And before anyone could react, the gates of the COP30 climate summit were no longer gates at all. They were broken. Indigenous protesters, with their faces painted, feathers glinting under floodlights, surged forward. They pushed past barriers, ripped a door clean off its hinges, and stormed into the world's biggest climate conference. The place meant for quiet negotiation suddenly became a battleground of belief and fury. A clash between those who speak for the earth and those deciding its fate. For a moment, the symbol of global unity trembled under the weight of rage. And the question that filled the air wasn't about carbon targets or net zero timelines. It was who really gets to fight for the planet. Soon after, security guards sprinted toward the entrance. Protesters shoved, yelled, and waved banners reading, "Our forests are not for sale." Drums thundered, doors slammed, metal detectors toppled. One security guard was carried away in a wheelchair, clutching his stomach. Another was bleeding from the head, struck by a drum. UN officers used tables to barricade doors as the protesters fought to stay inside. Plastic bins flew through the air, and shouts turned to screams.
In Brazil, world leaders are meeting under the banner of COP30, the annual climate summit. It is being held in Belém, on the edge of the Amazon rainforest. The idea, to find solutions to the same crisis that is now flooding homes across the world. But the summit is already showing familiar cracks. The United States has not sent a senior delegation. Around 160 countries are represented only by ministers or deputies. And the targets discussed a decade ago in Paris remain largely unmet. Brazil's president says he brought the meeting to the Amazon so that delegates could see the reality. He's calling for a global fund to protect rainforests and a roadmap to phase down fossil fuels. However, the discussions sound much like those from past summits. Funds promised are still unpaid. Timelines are still disputed. And the gap between words and action keeps widening. It has been 30 years since the first COP meeting. 30 years of plans, declarations, and photo opportunities. Yet global emissions keep rising, and the storms keep coming. This week, the contrast is impossible to miss. In one part of the world, families are fleeing rising water. In another, delegates are debating rising costs. One country is fighting to survive another typhoon. The rest are still fighting over who should pay for prevention. Climate change is no longer a projection on paper. It is a pattern in the sky, in the soil, and in the storms.
The Climate Convention returns to the country where it was born. Today, the eyes of the world turn to Belém with immense expectation. For the first time in history, a climate COP will take place in the heart of the Amazon. In the global imagination, there is no greater symbol of the environmental cause than the Amazon rainforest.
Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley said the world needs to do far more to help countries most impacted by the climate crisis, including those hit by Hurricane Melissa.
Because all of us should hold our heads down in shame, because having established this fund a few years ago in Sharm el-Sheikh, its capital base is still under $800 million, while Jamaica reels from damage in excess of $7 billion US, not to mention Cuba, Haiti, or the Bahamas.
Well, it takes place a decade after the Paris Climate Agreement, in which countries pledged to try and restrict the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees. Well, a recent UN report warned that governments are falling short of those promises made. The UN chief said this year's meetings must end with a credible plan. Well, Brazil hopes that the location of this year's meeting will highlight the importance of protecting the environment and its ecosystems. But there are some key countries who won't be attending this time. Big economies and big polluters: China, India, and the United States.
Tuvalu's Home Affairs and Environment Minister Maina Vakufua-Talia criticized the Trump administration for not sending a high-level delegation to the climate summit.
Tragically, the world's largest historical emitter of greenhouse gas emission has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. I was at the UN General Assembly when President Trump spent a considerable amount of his address to world leaders disparaging renewable energy sources and challenging the scientific consensus on climate change. Mr. President, this is a shameful disregard for the rest of the world. We only need to reflect on the recent impact of Hurricane Melissa that wreaked havoc on Jamaica and Cuba, and Typhoon Tino that hit the Philippines, to understand that climate change is here.
The Trump administration's defended its decision to skip the climate summit. A White House spokesperson said, quote, President Trump will not jeopardize our country's economic and national security to pursue vague climate goals that are killing other countries, unquote. In one of his first acts in office, Trump began the process of withdrawing the U.S. from the landmark Paris Climate Agreement.
Essa daqui é a sala das decisões da COP. As negociações acontecem em salas de reunião menores, mas toda vez que tiver que decidir algo, os países vão votar aqui. Todos os países têm assentos aqui, é como uma Assembleia Geral da ONU. A gente vai ver algumas cadeiras vazias, por exemplo, aqui atrás de mim está o espaço dos Estados Unidos, eles não mandaram representantes, então a cadeira vai ficar vazia, mas os outros países que mandaram representantes vão estar nessa sala toda vez que tiver uma votação.
这场原本用来检视、监督并确保全球减碳承诺落实的国际大会，在美国、中国与印度3个主要碳排放国的领袖皆未出席的情况下，也让外界感受到明显的缺席与空洞。更具反差的是，峰会开幕后，大会本身反而成了被检视的对象。根据 BBC 报道，为迎接 COP30 与会者，主办城市贝伦修建一条名为自由大道的高速公路，工程穿越部分受保护的亚马逊雨林区域。尽管地方政府强调工程采用多项永续设计，当地居民也普遍认为基础建设确有其必要性， 但在亚马逊腹地为因应气候峰会而大规模施工，仍然使环保团体质疑这样的工程是否违背气候高峰会的初衷。今年是巴黎协定签署10周年，照理来说，这应该是全球盘点成果、调整策略并制定下一阶段路线的关键时刻。然而，实际数据显示，世界不但没有守住巴黎防线，反而离目标越来越远。根据联合国环境规划署最新评估，就算各国完全落实更新后的气候承诺，本世纪末全球升温仍可能落在约 2.3 到 2.5 度之间。若以现行政策推算，不少独立研究机构预估的暖化路径仍接近 2.7 度，这意味着距离 1.5 度的安全门槛不但没有缩短，反而持续拉大。而在缺乏实质进展的背景下，关键领袖的缺席更让这场峰会显得格外失焦。在美国方面，川普政府并未派出正式的联邦代表团，被部分媒体形容为几乎完全缺席这场全球气候对话。虽然加州州长纽森主动飞赴巴西，出现在 COP30 会场与周边活动中，强调加州将持续扮演绿色科技与减碳政策的推动者，同时也批评川普的气候与能源立场，认为这等于把下一轮绿色经济主导权让给中国。但这样的发言也被不少媒体解读为是在替2028美国大选预做布局。相较之下，中国代表团团长，同时也是生态环境部副部长的李高，在 COP30 场边接受法新社访问时采取较为柔性的语调。他表示，中国相信美国终将回到气候合作的轨道上，并强调全球必须共同展现绿色转型的不可逆转。在这里，我们看到中美两国的角色出现微妙的错位，一位州长试图替缺席的联邦政府补位，另一边则由副部长代表全球第2大经济体释出合作讯号。也许这是本届 COP30 值得反思之处。当各国忙于指出他国做的不够时，更棘手的问题往往是如何回看自己的足迹。在全球排放曲线尚未真正弯下来之前，这场年复一年召开的气候峰会，究竟是加快了世界的行动，还是让我们一次又一次看见人类在理想与现实之间的拉锯与停滞
？The Brazilian government has chopped down thousands of hectares of the Amazon to make way for a highway to ease COP30 traffic in Belém. Unbelievable stuff. A little earlier, I caught up with Mark Morano, who's the executive editor of Climate Depot, as they call it. He's in Brazil, and he's been out to look at that highway. I asked him to tell us what it tells us about the whole COP meeting process.
Well, we went out to the area where the road is still under construction in parts, and we saw the clear-cut path, we saw a dirt road, and it was an amazing sight because this is a rainforest city here in Belém. And what did they do with this United Nations Climate Summit in order to accommodate the billionaires, the oligarchs, the Hollywood celebrities, the world leaders who all come into this who all fly into this, and they would need to get around in this very small, relatively speaking, Brazilian city. They had to clear cut, by estimates, tens of thousands of rainforests, hundreds of thousands of trees, just to put this highway in so that the city would flow. And it's been a huge embarrassment for the United Nations. And what the most unbelievable aspect of this, not only just the hypocrisy, but the BBC is the one that broke it. The BBC
yes, exactly.
About 6 months ago. But typically, we've seen these conferences, and they can be anywhere from 20 to 40,000 people attending. They have carbon footprints larger than most cities around the world. In fact, they'll use more electricity during the next 2 weeks of the summit than most African nations do in a year. But at this summit, for the first time ever, there's not enough hotels, there's not enough rental housing.
For a long time, there were doubts the remote city of Belém was well equipped to host the 50,000-odd attendees coming for the conference. Particularly controversial was the housing shortage, which was immediately apparent when we arrived after traveling 50 hours to get here. We've just moved into our accommodations, and as you can probably tell, this is not a hotel, it's a local resident's own apartment. And many locals have actually moved out of their own homes just to help the city host COP30. And we've also heard that attendees are staying on cruise ships and even remodeled love motels just to be here. Our host Joanna Anshaw says renting out her residence was not only a chance to help plug the lodgings gap, but it was also a windfall.
We have a very big demand on people staying somewhere, for people who are coming to work here to COP30. So we do have another place to stay in the city, and it wouldn't be a problem for us to rent the place. So we just saw this opportunity to make some money also.
Listings on the official COP30 site easily hit at least $1,000 a night for a home like Joanna's. And this was after a slew of hotels were already constructed in a flurry, aptly named after the event they were built for.